Hi, I'm Joel Schrenk, voiceover talent and entrepreneur. You know, if I've learned one thing in my marriage, it's that successful conflict resolution requires letting the other person feel heard. You know, that's something that I wasn't particularly good at for a long time, but I learned to listen. Listening is something that we're taught from a very young age. The number of times I have to tell my kids to listen every day is, well, a lot. And the number of times my wife had to tell me to listen before I really understood what she meant.
Listen to me. Listen to me.
Well, that was a lot too. So today, we're going to focus in on listening. I'm sitting here out in my sound booth in my control room. I've got my cup of coffee and my comfy chair, and I hope you'll join me as we speak easy about listening. Simplifying concepts that really help you in life, relationships, and business. This is the Speaking Easy Podcast. So what are we talking about when we're talking about listening? I'm sure you've heard the idea that listening and hearing aren't the same thing. Someone might say something to me, I might actually hear what they have to say, but it might go in one ear and out the other. And I think that happens to a lot of us more often than we'd like to admit. But when we're really talking about listening, we're really talking about making the other person feel heard and making sure that we actually understand what it is that they're trying to say. And in order to do that, we have to get out of our own heads and focus on the other person. All too often, we're focused on what we're going to say next while the other person is talking, especially if you're in an argument or a conflict. Someone might be talking to you and they might be saying something that's actually a very valid point, but the whole time you're just trying to think of, what am I going to say back to that? Rather than actually listening to the person and taking in what they have to say. So number one, listening requires attunement. What is attunement? I feel like I might hear you say. It's not tuning a piano, it's not tuning your guitar, it's not a tune that you might sing. So stupid.
That's dumb.
So what is attunement? I hear you thinking to yourself. Do I need to hire a piano tuner? Or perhaps learn how to tune my guitar better? Or perhaps just hum a tune?
Way better.
No. None of those things have anything to do with attunement. Attunement is really focusing in on the other person and hearing what they have to say. It's really all of the things I've just been talking about, but taking it to the extreme. You put everything out of your own mind and you learn to really empathize with the other person. You are really taking in what they're having to say. You're focused 100% on not only what they're saying, but their body language, what their eyes are doing, what their face is doing, without being distracted by your own thoughts or other things. It really is just a fancy way of saying focusing on the other person while they're talking.
Stay focused, stay focused, stay focused.
It's like being in tune. You don't need to hire a piano tuner, but you can think of a piano or a musical instrument. When they're in tune, they're all playing together. They're playing nicely together. They sound right together because they're hitting the same notes. When you're attuning to someone, you're really kind of right on the same note with them. You're hitting the same chord and you're feeling the same feelings, and you really are listening to what they have to say. So number two, minimal encouragers. Minimal encouragers are just the simple, oh, okay. Really?
Okay.
Yeah, those sorts of things that you just say in a conversation. It sounds silly and it kind of feels silly as I'm saying it, but it's important to make sure that you're actually using kind of the oh, really? Okay.
I see.
So that people know that you're listening to them. If you just sit there stone-faced staring at somebody, they're going to think you're thinking of something else. They're going to think that you're distracted, because if you really just sit there, like, that's not listening. That's just, you can't, for those of you on the podcast who are just listening, you can't see. But I'm just, if you're just sitting there not doing anything, that's not really conducive to having a listening type of conversation. People don't really think that you're actually listening to them. It just looks like you're just staring at them either creepily or you're off in Wonderland paying attention to your own thoughts. And so having these little minimal encouragers like, oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Simple, small little things, but sometimes you do have to consciously think about throwing those in every now and then, because it lets the person know that you're listening to them. So number 3, listening requires reflection. Now, I'm not talking about self-reflection. I'm not talking about a reflection in a mirror.
Yeah,
That's me.
I'm talking about reflecting what the other person is saying. You could also call that paraphrasing. So there are several different types of reflection. One of them is specifically just paraphrasing. Someone tells you something, and then you repeat it back to them. Now, I'm not saying you should just repeat back word for word what the person has said, but kind of summarize what they've said and repeat it back to them in your own words. And what that does is just let them know that you took in what they said and you understand what it is that they're saying. And it affirms to the other person that you actually were listening to them and that you actually do understand what it is that they're saying.
I understand.
The second type of reflection is a reflection of feeling or a reflection of emotion. That's when you're trying to take in how the person is feeling. That's not necessarily saying the same words back to them, but you might see how they're acting or the tone of voice, or if they're obviously feeling somewhat sad or upset, you might say, wow, I can see that you're really feeling upset. I can see that that really makes you sad. You're reflecting their emotion back to them. And what that does is it helps them to understand that you're actually paying attention to what they're doing. You're actually feeling what they're feeling. You actually are attuning with them.
Listen carefully.
And then the third type of reflection is reflection of meaning. Now, you might think of that as a combination of the first two, just kind of wrapped together to really understand what the person really means in what they're saying. So you take what they say, a reflection of their content, or paraphrasing, and then you take how they feel, a reflection of their emotions, and you kind of wrap them all up to understand what do you really mean in what you're saying. So, for example, someone might say, I can see that you're really feeling sad about this whole situation. I can see that this whole situation is making you frustrated, and that is just something that is inhibiting you from moving forward. Now, that's obviously very generic, but you can kind of see the idea of you're not just taking what they're saying, you're not just taking how they're feeling, but you're wrapping it all up, and you're kind of saying, and you're kind of taking it to the next level and saying, yeah, and you can see how this might be kind of an inhibition to you moving forward and getting the things you want because you're feeling this, because you said that this is what's happening. And then you kind of take it to the next level. And that's kind of high level stuff. So start with the first two, reflection of content or paraphrasing, and reflection of feeling, how the other person's emotions are coming across. And then when you start to feel comfortable and confident with those, then you can start to really look into reflecting what they really mean and taking it to that next level.
I want you to take it to the next level.
And then the last piece of reflection is summarizing. Now, summarizing is kind of taking reflection of meaning, but taking it a whole step further, because maybe you've gone for a little while, you're listening, you're reflecting back what the person is saying every now and then, reflecting some emotion, maybe a little bit of reflection of meaning here and there. But it's been a little bit and they've talked a little bit, and you want to give them the sense that you really know what they're talking about. Maybe you've reached kind of the end of a natural pause in the conversation, and you really want them to understand, yes, I really understood the whole point of what we just talked about. So you take everything and you summarize it. And you summarize it including paraphrasing, including how you've seen the person feeling, including what you kind of see that in the meaning of what's going on, and just everything you've just talked about for the last couple of minutes or the last 10 minutes or however long it's been, and you summarize it.
Blah, 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 and you know the rest.
Now, that's something that you're not going to do frequently in a conversation where you're listening to the person, but it is something that you'll do maybe even at the end of a conversation, just to let the person know, hey, this is what I heard and what we talked about today. This is a brief summary of what I heard and what I saw and how you feel and what I kind of see that it means for you. And this is the whole shebang here.
The whole shebang, and you guys are along for the ride.
So again, that's kind of a high-level thing. It's actually more difficult than you might think because it does require you to really pay attention to what the person is saying throughout the entire conversation, which oddly enough is difficult for most people to do. Number 4, questions. Now, questions can be deceptively difficult to use when you're really trying to listen to someone in a conversation. They can be difficult because questions can either further the conversation or they can put a complete stop to it. Now, there are 2 types of questions. One is open-ended questions, and one would be close-ended questions. Now, an open-ended question is something that kind of leaves things open for the person to fill in. That's the sort of question that is really going to further the conversation and allow the other person to just continue talking. An easy example of an open-ended kind of starter question would be, what's going on with you today?
What?
Things like that. That gives the person plenty of room to just answer and talk, and then you can just listen to what they have to say. A close-ended question would be something like, So where are you from? That's got a very short answer. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. Okay, now what do you do with that? That's the end of it now. There's no more conversation after that.
Before you've even spoken a line, you're done.
You might say, oh, how did you end up there? Oh, okay, that's a little bit more open. There's a little bit more of something to go off of on that. How do you feel about living in Phoenix? That's another thing that might kind of bring things a little bit further, though I will be honest with you, using questions like, how do you feel about this, can be a little bit tricky to use in a conversation because it can end up being kind of a closed-ended question. If I ask you, oh, how are you feeling? I feel angry. Okay, now where do you go with that?
I am very angry with you right now.
So a lot of times, rather than asking questions, I'll reflect back to someone. And I won't actually ask a question. I'll just be like, oh, wow, and it seems like that really makes you angry. Rather than saying, does that make you really angry? Because one of those, if I say, wow, it seems like that really makes you angry, that gives the person kind of, yeah, it really does, because this, that, and this. Whereas if I asked, does that make you angry? Yes, it does. That's the answer to the question. They've answered the question. It's kind of a mental thing because once you've answered the question, okay, what else do you have to say now?
What do you do for a living?
Lots of things.
Where's your office?
I don't have one.
How come?
I don't need one.
Where's your wife?
Don't have one.
How come?
It's a long story.
Okay, well, where are we going to go from there? So that's kind of the good and the bad about questions is it can further the conversation when you kind of come to a pause. And the bad thing is that it can totally stop the conversation if you don't do it correctly. So a good rule of thumb is honestly, don't ask questions unless you absolutely have to. It's a good idea to just try and make it through the first 5 or 10 minutes of a conversation without asking any questions at all. And that really gives the other person the opportunity to expand on what they're trying to say. And yes, there might be some uncomfortable pauses for a moment. But I think you'll be surprised that even if you just kind of let yourself sit in silence for a minute, the other person might just kind of pick up, rather than trying to feel like you need to fill that silence with a question.
Q is for questions, which we'll ask until we croak.
So as with everything, practice makes perfect. Practice these skills in your relationships. Start with some of the simpler ones like attunement, minimal encouragers, then reflecting back some of the content, paraphrasing, reflecting back some emotion. And then start moving into some of the more complex skills like reflecting meaning, summarizing, and learning to ask the right questions at the right time. I hope this was helpful to you. If you liked this content, be sure you subscribe, you like it, you give it a review, you say something in the comments section, do all the things, and we'll talk to you again next time.